This is Talk Radio.
Across the UK, online, on DAB+, and on your smart speaker.
The Week with Trisha Goddard on Talk Radio.
Welcome back. Yes, as you heard, I'm Trisha Goddard here on Talk Radio. Just a reminder that you can watch us now on television. You can go to talkradiotv.com and find out how you can watch us on your Apple TV or Samsung or whatever. Or just download the Talk Radio TV app and watch us in glorious Technicolor. Love to hear from you. Remember, and I should remember the phone numbers, but there you go. Let me 0344 499 1000, 0344 499 1000, or tweet at Talk Radio, or text 87222. Start your message with the word talk and get involved. Now, are you working from home? Are you enjoying working from home? I know some people do. Some people have been going absolutely bats and can't wait to get back into the office. Some people don't have a choice. Obviously, if you work in a factory or what have you, you don't have a choice. You have to go back to work in order to earn your money. But I was interested in a piece this week by Dragon's Den panellist Tuka Suleiman, and he was giving his verdict. And he was saying that he was delighted to hear that a cabinet minister is arguing that people who have returned to work should be paid more than those who prefer to work from home. Mr. Suleiman goes on to say that he prefers having people in the office. He says, I don't want to schedule 4 Zoom calls so we can all lean back in our ergonomically correct chairs and talk as though we're on autopilot. He actually says that he believes that the only way to bring people back into the office, because he prefers to have people fully engaged instead of staring at a screen, surreptitiously checking out their view of their back garden and pretending they're fully engaged when they're not. He's saying that if the only way to get people back to the office is to set one salary for people who work from home, and a higher one for those who come into the office and spend, in some cases, thousands of pounds commuting, then so be it. So he thinks you should be paid more if you get off. His thing seems to be if you get off your backside and actually come into the office. Of course, he does make the provision that there are factory jobs and what have you where you don't have that choice. But he's talking about office jobs. I'd love to know how you feel. Are you just lounging around at home and Zoom calls, skiving off work? Is it saving you money in childcare? Or are you somebody who's actually going into the office and are pretty ticked off that somebody who is at home and choosing to work from home is getting the same amount of pay as you when you're having to pay for your train ticket, your commuting costs and all those sorts of things? Love to hear from you. Do give us a call. Joining me now is Jackie Handy, who's Inclusive Leadership Specialist at Runway Global. Thank you so much for being here, Jackie.
Well, thank you for having me.
So what are your thoughts? Should people actually taking the time and trouble, and some would say the added risk of going into the office, should they be paid more than people who stay at home to work?
Okay, so I mean, isn't it a great question? It's $1 million question, really, isn't it? And the way I see it, Trisha, is that it is about choice. And we have to start looking at the changing face of work. So I believe that COVID has prompted us to start re-looking at how we lead our people, how we lead our workers, and how we work. And, it's quite interesting. Microsoft did a survey, I don't know if you saw it, that basically talked about how many people liked to work from home and how many didn't. And some of the things that they were looking at, this was with over 31,000 people in over 30 countries around the world. Yeah. And I believe the figure was 73% of those people said they would like to continue some form of remote working.
So that's working at home. 73%.
Absolutely, yeah. And furthermore, just to keep going with the stats for a minute, 53% of people who had been working from home had said that actually they were happier they felt happier in themselves doing so. And that is, of course, combined with the added stress of homeschooling and, perhaps those distractions that we just have at home. And yet still 53% of people were happy working from home. So what does that tell us? It tells us that potentially our organisational cultures need to actually shift. That's the thing that needs to shift. In terms of the pay situation, of course, in this country we've got to be mindful of the Equality Act.
Right.
So, can you effectively, and I'm not a legal expert, but can you effectively pay somebody less working from home but doing the same job?
But what if there's people going into the office are doing the same job but having to fork out for commuting costs?
Sure. So perhaps pay the expenses, so that might be the thing, right? So the salary for equal work needs to be on a par.
Do you think, just out of interest, that traditionally, and this is, I'm generalising here, but traditionally the woman has been looking after the child. Do you think it made things, while it probably threw up other problems, but it took away childcare and just feeling more engaged with your family for working from home? And I don't say everybody, because I'm sure there are a lot of women who can't wait to get back out of the house. But do you think it helped? It has helped women?
I think it must have. Those figures suggest that actually, that there must have been that depth of connectedness. And I think that's what we miss. And I don't think that can always be replicated back in the office either. Again, I carry on with where I started, and that's choice and flexibility. Right. And that's what I think we need to start looking at. Tuka Suleiman's comments, and although I'm a big fan of his shirts, his comments, I do think... they do come from a privileged place. Now, when we talk about privilege, just to be clear, my belief is that privilege and having privilege doesn't make you a bad person. Right. But it's how you leverage the privilege. And I think we need more people, more men especially, to leverage their privilege to make space for everybody else. But I think what happens is...
So what do you mean by privilege? In this particular case?
In this particular context. So I think he is speaking from a position where his own map of the world, if you like, his blinkered view, based on his identity, his heritage and his culture, if you like, and his gender, are coming into the mix. And so what happens is when the pressure's on, we default to type. And this is where, we talk about unconscious bias. People have heard it, but this is really how it comes to life in society and in processes. And so I think what Tuka's doing in terms of that very blinkered view actually is, and I think it's fair to say as well, it's not all blinkered in this way, but he is really asserting his maleness, his elitism, perhaps on society. And there's so many people, of course, that just doesn't fit their mould. Right. And 400,000 people who are, I won't say disabled, I'd like to say differently abled, are out of work now. Now, why is that? Because I think disabled suggests that they're dismissed, whereas differently abled, of course, we look at the abilities, we look at the potential. And there was so much potential for those people either living with a disability or who are neurodiverse perhaps, to come into the workforce and really give something.
Because I was going to say, it's interesting, and I was reminded of that. A lot of people are showing anxiety with the easing of COVID because they found it easier not to face the commute, the social situations, the crowds, and what have you. So, and just on that point, if you are living with, you're differently abled, and that commute is maybe a major reason that you aren't working. If you're saying if employers open up their minds as to work models, it can be inclusive of those people.
Absolutely. And a recent study this week, actually, was reported on the BBC that the leading job site read.co.uk, they stipulated that actually they had twice as many job applications when remote working was offered. Now, I'm a former recruiter, so I know how challenging it can be when there aren't enough candidates to fill those jobs. And so again, we're talking, right, so there is a desire for this, first of all. There's also a whole population of people who can be given opportunities, but should they be given those opportunities at the expense of pay?
Right. I see where you're coming from.
This is where the dichotomies takes place, right? So if you want to pay people more, pay them the expenses to travel, right? And although I was talking to somebody earlier, actually, who said, you know what? If I was paid less to work from home, I'd take it. Because because I'd been given time with my family. I've really enjoyed not having those stressful commutes. And I don't think it's just about the clinically vulnerable, if you like, that perhaps worry. As you rightly say, there are people who have increased anxiety right now.
Well, now, there is that culture of he who stays at the office, or he or she who stays at the office the longest wins. I remember doing a story about Japan and the stress on mental health, just people trying to stay in the office. I don't think it hasn't completely gone away, has there? Do you think there's a risk of a bias if you've got a company with some people working from home, some people making the commute? Do you think there's a potential for, I'm not saying gangs, but cliques of workers or friction between workers who are coming in and those who aren't?
Right. I do. I totally do. And gosh, haven't we got enough divide? I mean, yeah, right. So I'm just
thinking how it plays out with promotion and things like that.
Absolutely. And this is why, my belief actually is it's so much more than just who works remotely and who comes into the office. What is this culture of toxicity really that says if you're in the office longest, you are the best. If you shout the loudest, you are the best. Where does this all come from? And, we go back generations, Trisha, and we think, well, it wasn't that long ago that women weren't in the workplace, right? Yeah. And our demographic has changed. There are things that we are talking about much more now. Gender fluidity. We are talking about mental health much more. We're talking about disability. And these are things that I think demand a shift in the way in which we develop organisational culture. And I think the way in which we work, the flexible working, is a big part of that.
I'm talking to Jackie Handy, Inclusive Leadership Specialist at Runway Global. There is also that thing because of Brexit, because of certain immigration rules, that we're suffering a decline in certain workforces, although a lot of those are in cafeterias and where people have to come into the office. It seems to me short-sighted that somebody hasn't worked out that if they bring about the kind of flexibility you're suggesting, that could help bridge those gaps.
I know.
I'm just thinking about that when we're talking about it. I was like, hang on. Yeah. Here you've got one part of the world saying, business world saying we don't have enough people. There you've got the percentages you talked about people who want to continue working from home. Duh.
I know. And I think the perception and especially with those differently abled amongst our community, I think the perception is that it's so expensive. It's going to be so terrible to have to sort of change things in our office to make way for them. But that's equity. That is equity. It's saying that we do not all need the same thing, but we all need the same opportunities. So I'm
guessing if you're going to pay commuting costs for one person,
sure,
that pot of money that you spend on person X could be used for person Y who's at home,
right,
and needs, I don't know, internet or what have you.
Sure. And there's government support, to help employers make certain reasonable adjustments, so it's out there if people would just explore it. And I think, this is a big part of my work is about trying to change the mindset of the leadership of an organisation, to recognise that, if we're a bit more courageous and we kind of get out of our own echo chambers, get out of our own way a little bit, and recognise that, there's a world of diversity out there, and that is a fact, and I think equity is a right, and I think inclusion is a choice. And I think, when we start to realise that, and it's becoming more and more prevalent, because
well, it will have to keep going that way.
Oh, for sure.
But what happens if you're working from home at the moment and then your company says, right, from this day on, you must come into the office. Do you have any rights, or are we going to see thousands of unfair dismissal cases suddenly explode, for which we'll have to pay anyway?
So to be clear, so I don't have all of the legality answers for you in relation to that, but I do know that you have a voice, right?
Yeah,
so you have a voice. And once again, the employer, I think, legally or otherwise, I think has a duty of care, actually. I think it goes beyond the legalities. We hear so much about organisations and our society just doing the bare minimums to avoid getting sued. And instead of being more proactive to say, look, okay, this won't get us sued if we don't do it, but let's do it anyway because it's the right thing to do, and it's going to create happier employees who perform better, are more productive, more creative and innovative, and will make more money.
Yeah,
It sounds like a no-brainer to me.
It does sound like a no-brainer. On the other hand, I've got to say as well, there are people who, and certain industries where it is going to be easier coming into the office, isn't it? It's feedback. And it's interesting because I usually work remotely from Connecticut, and now I'm in the office, and I have to say I enjoy both.
Right.
So as you said, that study showed that people would like, I suppose at the minimum, a split.
I think so. I mean, what I would say is that there are also lots of figures from that Microsoft report I started with that suggest that people are working much more from home than less.
Longer hours. Yeah.
So, the comments, again, going back to Tuka Suleiman's article, suggesting that we're all sort of swiveling around in our ergonomic chairs on autopilot is, I think, grossly, again, misunderstood.
No.
I too, in my work, I keynote, I train, and I can do that virtually very, very easily. And it's been wonderful to speak to people from around the globe in the same room, if you like.
That's true.
And look, Zoom doesn't have to be boring. Right?
No.
Zoom doesn't have to be boring.
You can be like a cat or a dog.
Well, there's lots of those, isn't there, going across the screens?
No,
yeah.
but definitely, I think it has, as you said, COVID could be the necessary push for employers to think of other models of employment. Thank you.
I hope so.
Thank you so much. Jackie Handy, Inclusive Leadership Specialist at Runway Global, about the changing face of the workforce. It's not all about going to work or staying at home. You're listening to Trisha Goddard here on Talk Radio.
Online